Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgson Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hi Power Factor fans, I'm Rick, and this is the special Power Factor Show weight loss episode. I went to the doctor recently. They said my cholesterol was too high. One of the things you can do is lose weight. So I've been hitting the greens. But today we're actually not going to talk about dieting. We're going to talk about putting your gun on a diet. As I mentioned in more than one episode now, the gun that I've been shooting in backup gun division of IDPA for the last 15 years is no longer legal. The 2015 rule book has moved bug from kind of a division apart from other divisions. You only load 5 rounds, no on-the-clock reloads, and turned it into a full-fledged division that can be shot in a regular IDPA match. And along the way, it was changed from a 5-round division to a 6-round division. 5-shot revolvers are still legal. You can load 5 in your 5-shot revolver, but you're allowed to load 6. So what I think you're going to find is now short-barreled 6-round revolvers and then auto pistols, regardless of their capacity, are going to be loaded to 6. At the start of the course of fire, your auto pistol is loaded 5+1, and then your reloads are 6 rounds each. So to maintain the kind of the equivalency between revolvers and auto pistols in backup gun division, it's always going to be 6 rounds in the gun. Now, the issue that it's caused me is that we have, and of course my backup gun, no problem meeting the 6-round requirement. I know you want to see it, so I'll drag it out again. This is Detonics Combat Master. And if you are a regular watcher of Power Factor Show, you know that you have to endure a little bit of a history lesson with each episode that features me and my guns. So we'll do a little trip down memory lane. Detonics, the word Detonics, D-E-T-O-N-I-C-S, I believe is the science of explosives. And Detonics was formed by some guys in the Seattle area. There actually used to be a gunpowder factory kind of out in the, what was then, you know, way out in the burbs, way out in the boonies really. And guys that were working at that gunpowder factory decided amongst themselves that they would start a gun company. Sid Woodcock is the guy whose name is most closely associated with the company. He was kind of the founder of the company, but there were some other people, engineers and prototypers and whatnot, that had a hand in the design of the pistol. But in the early 70s, the Detonics headquarters was in the Seattle Tower, which is down on the corner of 2nd University, and it's right across the street from the building that I work in. So I can walk around to the east side of the building and look right into the penthouse of the Seattle Tower and just imagine, you know, back in the 70s and 80s that Detonics was housed there. And then their plant was out on the east side, what we call the east side, out in Bellevue. For the people who are from the Washington area, it's out near where Interstate 405 crosses Interstate 90. The Detonics plant was out there. And the idea behind the pistol was to create a very compact version of the 1911 style pistol. Now in the early 70s, we didn't have this proliferation of miniature 45s that we have today. You had the full-size 1911 style pistol, the government model, and you had the Commander, which was a little shorter in the barrel, lighter weight because of the aluminum frame, but really not much smaller. So the idea was to radically shrink the 1911 down into a compact-sized pistol. And it was a groundbreaking design in a number of ways. If you look at 1911 pistols today, some of the popular features that you see on them were pioneered by the Detonics design. One of those is the bushingless bull barrel. The Detonics was the first pistol to have the enlarged muzzle that bore directly in the end of the slide to replace the bushing. Now, why would you do that? When you shrink the gun down below a certain size, when the slide cycles back, you don't have enough room in the slide for the bushing to extend back, the skirt of the bushing, to extend back into the slide, or it'll run into the barrel lugs. And so it was kind of necessity is the mother of invention. You had to get rid of, the Detonics guys had to get rid of that bushing in order to shorten the barrel to 3.5 inches. Today we see bushing barrels all the time, and it's mostly used now, or often used now, to add weight to the front of the gun. But in the case of the Detonics, it was used to get rid of the bushing. The other thing you'll notice is this extended guide rod. Back in the day, of course, all the 1911 style pistols had a short guide rod. The Detonics not only pioneered the extended guide rod, but a captive guide rod. We had essentially an assembly of the rod, the spring, and the plug held together by a spring, and the whole thing, or a screw, and the whole thing can be removed out the back of the slide as a unit. So one of the complaints about disassembling 1911 style pistols is having to turn the bushing and then control the spring as you remove the slide. Well, with this, the spring's captive, there's no bushing, so you just run the slide off the gun, pull out the guide rod assembly, and the gun's field stripped. So it made the gun simpler, easier to maintain, having the bushingless barrel and the captive guide rod. Some other interesting sort of features are what Detonics plugged at the time as a loaded gun indicator. And you can see the back of the magazine has a little slot in it. And what that allowed was, when the gun is fully loaded, it allowed the tail of the follower to stick out the bottom of the magazine. And of course, you could tell by looking or feeling that, oh yeah, my gun's fully loaded. Now, there's been some discussion since that really was, that was the way they decided to market it, but it actually was so that they could maintain a standard GI style follower, which provides stability for the follower as it moves up and down inside the magazine. And so they didn't want to shorten the tail on the follower, so they cut that slot in the back of the magazine tube to allow the follower to protrude. And then they thought, hey, we'll describe it as a loaded gun indicator. So that was kind of another interesting feature. And of course, just making the gun smaller and lighter was the whole point of the exercise. The top of the slide, if you're not familiar with the story, the top of the slide was cut out like this to assist in thumb cocking the gun on the draw. The cocked and locked that we know of today as the kind of almost universally accepted way of carrying the 1911 style pistol, back in the 60s and 70s, that wasn't so universal. People were used to shooting revolvers for self-defense and duty use, and single action automatics. There was a little bit of trepidation about walking around with the hammer cocked. So the actual prototypes for this pistol that were made from cut down full-size pistols, they didn't even have a thumb safety on them, because the assumption was that you'd carry it hammered down on a live round and then thumb cock it on the draw. And so that's why that cut is made at the back. But of course, one effect that has is reducing the weight of the slide. Now, I'm aware that little teeny compact versions of the 1911 style pistol tend not to be as reliable as full-size versions, and there's a number of reasons for that. The small space available in the frame for recoil springs, the small space available in the frame for magazine springs, and also the reciprocating weight and the distance that the slide travels. You're talking about a cartridge of the same power, but now fired in a gun with a lighter slide, different spring rates. The barrel locks up at a steeper angle and just causes some issues that some guns better than others mitigate. But one of the things that they all are trying to do is, of course, reduce weight. So one of the other weight-saving features is this Pockmeyer rubberized aluminum mainspring housing. And when you're talking about losing weight on a 1911 style pistol, you want to look at the low-hanging fruit. What are the heavy parts that can be most readily replaced? And focusing on the mainspring housing is the place where I usually suggest you start. Here's the standard GI style all steel mainspring housing. This is the one that's been in use. The arched housing has been in use since the mid-1920s. Most of them now have a flat housing, but I'm an arched housing guy, so I weighed 3 different arched housings. Here we have our Pockmeyer aluminum housing with the rubber cover on it. Here we have a Colt factory, I call it plastic. I'm sure it's some high-tech polymer. Plastic mainspring housing, and then of course the original military spec all steel mainspring housing. And the steel part weighs 2.0 ounces. The rubber covered aluminum part weighs 0.58 ounces, and the plastic part is lightest of all at 0.35 ounces. So if you have a steel mainspring housing on your pistol and you want a quick way to knock over 1.5 ounces off the weight, swap your steel mainspring housing for a plastic one. There have been reports that the plastic mainspring housings aren't as durable as steel, and that's very possibly the case. The only plastic mainspring housing I have in use is on my Delta Elite, and it takes a lot more of a beating than any of my 45s do. Of course, it doesn't have as many rounds through it either. But if a gun firing full power 10 millimeter with a 25-pound mainspring is able to survive, I'm sure your competition pistols with a reduced power mainspring shooting 45 or 9 millimeter are going to do it as well. So if you're looking for a place to start on weight reduction, check your mainspring housing, 1.5 ounces right off the top right there. Now the other thing we've already touched on was the guide rod. Your old GI 1911s have a short guide rod, and it's a tubular piece of steel. You can see the light passing through it, so it's really very light. There are modern versions of this short guide rod that are solid, and they're going to weigh a little bit more. So if you're going to try to save some weight by losing your full-length steel guide rod and swapping it for a GI style guide rod, the most bang for the buck is one of these hollow rods. And your weight difference, the long rod weighs 1.6 ounces, and the GI rod weighs 0.4 ounce, less than half an ounce. So you're saving over 1 ounce of weight by swapping out your full-length steel rod and replacing it with a short GI style rod. Now in the past, there have been some plastic guide rods. I've never seen one. I've not seen one for sale for years. But I think 20 or 30 years ago, there were some plastic guide rods, and I think they'd be a great idea. They would serve something of a function as a shock buff, being plastic, and if they only cost a couple of bucks each, you could replace them every week or every month or whatever. You wouldn't have to worry about them being durable or not, and they would be even lighter than a metal one, than a short metal one. Probably a long Delrin, I think was the, I don't know if that's a patented name for a tough polymer, but I see hard plastic, tough plastic parts made from Delrin. So I'm thinking the guide rods, if my memory serves, were Delrin back in the day, and you could probably save additional weight even with a full-length rod. A full-length Delrin rod is probably lighter than the short GI rod, but again, I'm not thinking they're making those anymore. But if you can scare one up or you want to put some in production, it might be worth it. So those are the two areas on a typical 1911 style pistol where I would say you're going to find the most opportunity for weight loss, your mainspring housing and your guide rod. If you swap out the full-length guide rod for a short one, swap out the steel mainspring housing for a plastic one, you're going to knock well over 2 ounces off your gun. And if you're shooting, it's not such an issue today. In IDPA, it used to be a real concern, especially in custom defensive pistol division, when the weight limit was 41 ounces. Your typical kind of original military configuration style 1911 pistol weighed about 39 ounces. But when you start putting things like large steel mag wells on them, full-length steel guide rods, a lot of 1911 style pistols now have light rails built into the dust cover. You start adding that weight. And of course, IDPA has reacted to that by first increasing the weight to 42 ounces, now increasing it to 43 ounces. So there's really not that much of a hassle of getting your weight down. But again, an all-steel gun with all those steel parts on it is very likely going to weigh more than 43 ounces. So if you go with a short guide rod, an aluminum magwell funnel, a plastic mainspring housing, all these parts, you'll easily be able to get your gun back within the 43 ounce limit. Now in the other divisions, IDPA has raised the weight limit across the board for automatic pistols to 43 ounces. So there's really no problem. Most of the guns shot in SSP division have plastic frames anyway. They weigh 25 ounces. You know, you're nowhere near the limit. But it used to be kind of interesting. One of the interesting wrinkles in the IDPA rules is that any gun that's legal in stock service pistol is also legal for enhanced service pistol. And back in the day, enhanced service pistol, and by back in the day, I mean like 3 years ago, the enhanced service pistol weight limit was 43 ounces. The stock service pistol weight limit, I think, was 36 ounces. One of the ESP rules that caused some consternation was you could not, on a metal framed gun, have a full length light rail or dust cover light rail that extended out to the end of the slide. There was no such limitation in stock service pistol. And one of the popular pistols at that time, and it's still popular today, is the CZ75 derivative called the SP01. Well, the SP01 weighed just a little bit more than the 36-ounce weight limit in SSP, meaning it wasn't legal in that division. It had the full-length light rail on the dust cover, so it was also not legal for ESP. But if you could get the weight of it down below 36 ounces, it would then be SSP legal and therefore ESP legal. So there was almost like a cottage industry that cropped up of lightweight grips, especially lightweight grips, because I think it was just a fraction of an ounce over. I mean, it was very little. But there were certain parts, like if you removed the firing pin block, little bits of the slide, remove those, just very minor weight reduction was necessary, but they tried to do it with just swapping parts out and replacing parts to get the gun down, you know, just a fraction of an ounce. And that's the gun that I remember being a real problem initially for people to get it underweight. So again, it's just a matter of identifying those parts that are easiest to replace. And of course, on any auto pistol with replaceable grip scales, if you can take off a relatively heavy wood panel and replace it with something like carbon fiber or aluminum or something, that'll get the weight down. So of course, on a gun like that where you're looking at just a little difference and not so many parts that can be readily swapped out. That's one of the things about a 1911. You can change out the mainspring housing for an aluminum part. You can change out the grip safety for an aluminum part. You can put on the aluminum magwell funnel. Lots of little bits that are readily replaced with other bits that are lighter in weight. Another area where, again, we're way past the low-hanging fruit. Now we're trying to find tenths of an ounce in 1911 style pistol is the trigger. There's multiple different trigger sizes and materials. This is a short steel trigger. And by short, that means how far the finger piece extends from the frame. So if you have short fingers, you want to use a short trigger. Now this is an extra long aluminum trigger. And even though the shoe on the trigger is considerably longer, because this part is made out of aluminum, and on this gun, or on this part, it's all steel, this extra long aluminum trigger weighs 140 grains, while the short steel trigger weighs, I didn't weigh it. I didn't weigh the short steel. I weighed 5 triggers and I didn't weigh the short steel. Okay, let's compare the long aluminum to the STI carbon fiber trigger. Now this is a trick part. It's been around for a number of years. It is the king of light triggers. This long aluminum trigger weighs 116 grains for the long aluminum trigger. This long STI trigger weighs 45 grains. So, as luck would have it, my Detonics is sporting a long steel trigger. This is an old Videcki trigger. Videcki was the big name in 1911 triggers back in the day. They're out of business now, but that long steel trigger is about a half an ounce, 4/10 of an ounce, 235 grains, which is just over half an ounce for the long steel trigger, 45 grains or 1/10 of an ounce for the STI trigger. So if you're looking at, again, you're trying to, you know, get a 1/10 of a grain here, 1/10 of a grain there. If you've got a steel trigger, you can swap it out for a carbon fiber trigger, save quite a bit of weight that way. The thing, though, that I'm running into on the Detonics is that, as I said earlier, it's already designed to be a compact, lightweight gun. So there's just not that many places that you can go. The gun, I erroneously remembered that the last time I'd shot a sanctioned match with this gun, that it weighed 30.0 ounces with a full-length 7-round magazine in it. And I've showed this combination before. This is a regular GI-style magazine, and then I've added this plastic over-travel stop on it, which of course also acts as a finger rest. The frame is really very short, and if you have anything larger than an average-sized hand, having a little finger rest on there is good. But of course the problem is you're carrying around this extra tube length and this extra large, thick plastic collar, and that adds weight. Now, why do you do that, Rick? And the reason is that if the magazine isn't designed specifically for the gun to butt up against the bottom of the frame when it's fully inserted and locked into the gun, what you'll have is the magazine is relying on the slot where the magazine release locks the mag into the gun. It's relying on that slot as an over-travel stop. If I put a 7-round magazine in this gun, just a standard GI gun, and I push it all the way up to the top so that it's essentially the upward movement is being limited by that slot in the magazine tube, the magazine is hitting the ejector inside the frame. Now the ejector extends out into the mag well, and it's pinned into the frame, and the weight of that magazine bouncing up and down inside the frame every time you fire it, pounding on the ejector, can damage it, loosen its fit in the frame, bend it, or even break it. So you really absolutely need an over-travel stop to limit the upward movement of the magazine so that it doesn't contact the ejector. So I knew this magazine was heavy. Your typical 7 or 8 round 1911 magazine weighs about 2 ounces, and then adding this plastic collar on here was going to add a little more weight than that. So along with the mainspring housing and other things that I'm looking at, where can I cut off, some ounces? Since I don't need a 7-round tube, I use this magazine when I shoot in custom defensive pistol because I want that 7th round. But in backup gun, of course, with a 6-round limit, I don't need a 7-round magazine. So I pursued the compact 6-round magazine. Now, when I say compact, I mean the magazines that are designed to fit the kind of industry standard short-framed guns that were started back in the day in the 80s by the Colt Officers model and has subsequently been essentially adopted across the board by all the major manufacturers. Kimber, Springfield, everybody uses a compact frame length that was established by Colt back in the 80s. Well, of course, the frame length that Detonics established back in the 70s was as much shorter than a compact frame as the compact is shorter than a full-size 1911. So if I take my 1911 magazine and put it back to back with my new 6-round mag, you see just how much shorter, about 3/8 of an inch, the new magazine is. And then I didn't want the weight of this plastic collar. I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? Well, I noticed an advertisement by Chip McCormick, and they offer a base pad that's designed to adapt a full-length government-length mag to a compact pistol. It just provides a little finger rest and a little over-travel stop. And I thought, well, okay, I can put that base pad on my 6-round magazine, and now my 6-shot mag will be adapted to fit on the Detonics. Did you follow all that? So here it is. 6-round compact mag with the Chip McCormick little toe extension on the magazine. And I did have to trim it down just slightly. You do want it just enough over travel to ensure that when you push it in there, it does lock in securely. So I did trim off just a tiny little bit of the toe of this. So there was just a little bit of over travel, but not so much that it will bang off the ejector. I still have my finger rest, and I've saved half an ounce. So this magazine combo is a half an ounce lighter than the combo I was running before, and it hasn't really cost me anything because I still only need a 6-round capacity. I've got my finger rest. It worked out great. So half an ounce on the mag, half on the almost half on the trigger, a couple of tenths on the mainspring housing, and I'm still about an ounce overweight. So I don't know if it's ever going to happen. The problem I'm having with this gun is most of the areas where I would think to lighten the gun, they're already lightened. And if I swap out lighter parts for the parts that are swappable, I really am going to knock like an ounce and a half off the gun. And if I start doing things like I've thought about having JPL checker the front strap, do a little high grip checker the front strap. That'd probably knock off a couple of tenths. I could use lightweight grips, some kind of composite grips, and maybe drill some lightning holes in those to get a little more weight off. Some people have, I know, to get weight off steel frame pistols, they'll drill holes in the frame in any area that's covered by the grip panels. You just drill a little hole here, drill a little hole here, but I mean, when you start adding up all that weight, what I fear is going to happen is I'm going to get the gun down to like 29.2 ounces after drilling and milling and doing all that work, and it's still not going to weigh less than 29 ounces. So as Loke suggested, the producer, he said, why don't you just get a lighter gun? And maybe that's exactly what I'll do. But for now, it's just kind of an academic exercise. I've got the numbers for you there. You can knock tenths of an ounce, full ounces off the gun in some cases, but be aware that, regardless of modern plastic frame guns, there's not much you can do. They're already light, and so you don't need to really reduce the weight much. But any gun that's all steel, you can pursue replacing components with lighter parts if they're available, or replace steel with plastic or with aluminum, get the weight down. And I've just given you the things that I've pursued, trying to get about an ounce and a half off my gun, and it looks like maybe 1.3 or 1.4 is about as far as I can go, even if I start milling and drilling on it. So it might just be a lost cause, but it's been kind of fun and hopefully educational for you if you're looking for ways to save weight in your gun. That you can find it an ounce or two in a lot of guns that are all steel. So give it a try. Good luck.